Hello and Happy New Year. This is a screencast via Prezi about Manifest Destiny. So let's go over a couple different things about the Prezi first. I made this Prezi originally a year ago, so there are some images I left in. I took out of the path of the Prezi, what they call the path, but they're still there. So what I'll do is I'll link the Prezi itself, and I'll also link the screencast so you guys can take a look at those if you decide to do so. That's an image of myself, my goofy face there, and my son. Without the goofy face, of course, and so on and so forth. So that'll be there. Otherwise, screencast about Manifest Destiny. So let's take a look. So, Manifest Destiny, what is Manifest Destiny? First, it's an idea, okay? It is an idea that carries with it racist overtones or undertones, religious undertones, and has a lot of consequences that are both religious, economic, as well as some socio-political motives, okay? So you have a couple different things here. During this period of time, okay, and what I'm talking about basically is after the War of 1812, okay, you have a lot of reasons why Americans now will want to move west, but also why they are now able to move west. And we'll come back to some of those reasons a little bit later. But this is not, make no mistake, it's not something that happens just after the War of 1812. It actually is something that happens far before that, okay? America has a divine mission, okay, is what has been said here. And you want to think of John Winthrop. You want to go back as early as the early 1600s, okay, with Massachusetts Bay Colony. You want to go to the American Revolutionary War period, in which you have people like the Founding Fathers, like John Adams, who spoke of grand illuminations. He's referring to fireworks, okay, that'll be sent off from ocean to ocean, okay, so he's already referring to a continental United States. So this is certainly not a new message when John L. O'Sullivan mentions Manifest Destiny in his newspaper, the Democratic Review. But important that we remember that it accelerates after that period of time, okay? So O'Sullivan spoke of it, Manifest Destiny as fulfilling a critical need because of the yearly multiplying millions of Americans. So also a reference, or already a reference, to one of the reasons why Americans feel they need to move west in the way they're about to do that. Okay? An image here by John Gass. This is from the 1870s, but it refers to the period we're talking about, and it refers to Americans here, on what is actually on your right side as well. This light area here, moving into what is a dark area here in the west. We see Native Americans sort of being chased away. We see stagecoaches. We see railroads, communications, all parts of the riverboats here. We see all these different things that are references to the different elements of the market revolution, right? Mountaintops and so on and so forth. This sort of angelic figure of this woman who is spreading what we can refer to as liberty across the continental United States, or would-be continental United States. And the title of the painting, this portrait, being American Progress, also speaks volumes. So we're going to come back to this, but already start to think of some of the undertones that exist here in this portrait that may have some truth, and of course may be falsified in many ways, or exaggerated, or maybe a better way to put it. Okay. So let's look at this in two different ways. You have a northwest and a southwest. And as we keep moving west, right, the United States, the Americans in this United States that keeps growing, keep moving west. That northwest and southwest that we've seen in earlier generations, in earlier decades, are now being termed Old Northwest and Old Southwest. So let's look at a couple different features of those, and some of the things that I took from your textbook, and some things that I took from some of the readings that we had looked at in class, and things that you looked at over the recent break. But the Old Northwest, in reference to that, right? We've seen that the prohibition of slavery has existed since the 1780s, right? 1786, 1785, 86, and 87 with the Northwest Ordinances, right? Land Ordinance of 1785 to start with, right? It's part of the Articles of Federation, and very important to note that slavery has been prohibited there. Massive migration of Easterners coincides with the end of War of 1812. Big reason for that would be something very obvious, as a matter of fact, is that the British now, even though they were supposed to have removed themselves and their forts from the Ohio Valley, have not yet done so, and it's really the Treaty of Ghent, the end of War of 1812, that finally forces them to do this. So it really opens up what used to be a buffer of the British and their native allies, so that American whites can now move west. Okay, it's not that the natives aren't going to be hostile to some of them, and there's not going to be some conflict there, but without the British there, Americans do feel more free to be able to move in this direction. What's called a transplanted Yankee culture that is moved from the Northeast, particularly now to the Midwest and further to the Northwest. That's old and new Northwest. What it means to be a Yankee is it really depends on who you ask. If you would ask a Southerner who is someone who disliked the North and urban centers and things like that, they might refer to it as somebody who's just sort of a money-grubbing sort of a person. But a Yankee, in general terms, can denote someone from the North, particularly the Northeast. Again, we'll come back to that definition as it changes, because it will change. Mostly anti-slavery, they're politically Whig, and what they do is they recreate, and the Southerners will do the same thing, a diverse agricultural economy of the East on new Western farms. So again, it's not just about one crop or one sort of commodity, it is about a multitude of different things. So like in the South, it correlates directly with the market revolution, right? All of these things that allow growth, right? Eli Whitney's cotton gin, making it much easier to separate the cotton seeds from the cotton plant. This brings on this necessity for more slaves and more land to get even more cotton. All becomes possible with these different elements of the market revolution, whether it be in transportation or communication or invention, like Eli Whitney's cotton gin is. And short staple cotton, which takes shorter to grow, and therefore, for a shorter duration of time, you can actually grow what is, fine cotton, absolutely. Okay. Transportation improvements stemming from items like the Erie Canal in the north. So you have a couple different examples, although we're talking about the north right now, on either side. Unlike the South, became a place of social development and urban centers. So the investment, guys, is really the most important thing, is that in the Northwest, old Northwest that is, Americans are investing their money in something other than one thing, okay? So that brings on development. It brings on diversity. It attracts different kinds of people. All right. When there's something different people will sort of gravitate to that. When there's something that's just the same, you'll get a lot of the same sort of people that do come there. So if we move to the old Southwest, you have a very different sort of a scenario, right? And this, from the outset, you have the permission of slavery as a result of the Southwest Ordinance, unlike the Northwest Ordinance from before, driven by a great hunger for black belt land, right? That fine soil that we refer to as this dark, rich soil, and what they call the Black Belt in Alabama, and Mississippi, and Georgia, and also because of the freedom to do so following the end of War of 1812. So again, the same reason the Northerners have, with the lack of British soldiers and forts being in the Ohio Valley, the Southerners can take advantage of that same idea. All right. Southern migration west also coincided with cotton prices at market. Okay. So in other words, when cotton prices are good, Southern migration is good. All right, you'll have more development, more expansion in moving west as cotton prices go up. So things like for example, the Panic of 1819, the Panic of 1837, when cotton prices take a dive, you'll see less Southerners moving west. Just again, because cotton is king. Cotton drives their economy, the movement of them socially, and we can even make some elements to the politics of it, considering that most of them are Democrats. As we compared already, the Northerners being mostly Whig, or politically Whig, as we said before. They brought a slave culture, what's known as a slaveocracy, right? As we mentioned before, you do have a planter class, and you have these smaller planters, you have poorer planters, yeoman farmers, all these different kinds of people that are all sort of driven by this one crop of cotton, but at different levels, right? A planter, again, just to remind us a little bit about that, right? A planter class participant would be somebody who's more likely to invest more in slaves because they know that they have enough, or the means by which to have revenue from cotton to come in to pay for that investment in slaves. A smaller farmer, a human farmer in that class would just not maybe make that investment, take that risk in slave property, because they are not going to have the kind of land they need to yield the kind of cotton to make the kind of money to pay for that kind of slave property. So like the North, many new states are carved out of the communities, and communities are built up along rivers, particularly the Yazoo River, for example, and of course the Mississippi on both sides, north and south. Unlike the North, it became one-dimensional, right? Both economically but cotton and socially, given its slave basis. So again, very one-dimensional here, whereas the Northwest, we see that diversity as mentioned here before, right? So moving on, okay, some of the things that tend to be the same in both sides, or similar on both sides, is women. Women are playing a huge role. You'll see many of the rights for women that are adopted are quickly adopted in the in the West. Okay, because of the work women do, they're such an important part of society. Not that they're not important to the East too, but because of the work that they're doing, they become a real asset to any family, any farm. Okay, this is the case on both sides of the Mason-Dixon line, right? The famous line that separates North and South in the United States. They are leaders in what's called homespun activities. So in other words, they will make literally all the clothing their families wear. They will take part in churning butter, to shearing sheep, to doing all these different kinds of things that you can't really do without, particularly in the West, when it's really just you and your land. Okay. Took part in many activities that in the East, and we're still referring to women, would have been viewed as men's work, like some of the things I just mentioned, right? And they became more public. To this point, we've always described it as the private woman, the public male, the one involved in politics and this and that. And I'm not suggesting that women are getting involved in politics at this early part, but they certainly are becoming more involved and more invested and feel more invested in that kind of thing because of the work that they're doing. You still have that same element of East versus West rift, right? The conflict that's sort of always existed there. The reality there has been that you have something called claims clubs, okay? You have a lot of what's called squatters, people that don't belong or don't own land, but have lived on it for a long period of time. You have Eastern speculators who don't want these squatters on this Western land. But you have a lot of Westerners who want to uphold the claims these squatters appear to have by living on the land for such a long time over the Eastern speculators. So this can get messy from time to time, but the Westerners sort of create some unity within these claims clubs and try to get the claim of squatters over the actual ownership of speculators from the East. Okay, Northerners dealt with the powerful Sioux, Southerners dealt with the Comanches. So on either side, you're dealing with Native Americans that are powerful. The Sioux are a very powerful Indian nation that aren't going away anytime soon. But important to note as we move west that natives will always be a player in this, but they won't always be, unlike sometimes the image is always seen, they won't always be the ones that cause conflict. In fact, most of the time they're really just bystanders. They're really not causing a lot of conflict. They're not initiating conflict, in other words. Okay. So we get to two different directions here, right? The Old Northwest and the people that are traveling there are generally traveling to a place called Oregon, all right, and the Willamette Valley would be the place that most of them are actually going to settle. Okay, they catch what's called Oregon fever, right? There's a mild climate there. There's fur trading. Again, it kind of lends itself to the diversity in the North, right? It wasn't just about trading or growing one crop, but about many things. Fur trading would be one of those things. So Oregon fever in the north, in the south you have Alabama fever, Texas fever, and a lot of those, a lot of the comfort people have with places like Oregon is they feel that because missionaries like Marcus and Narcissa Whitman and people of that nature, Jason Lee of course, have been to these places, they feel that the Native Americans have been tamed in such a way. It sounds like kind of a silly thing to say, but it's one of the attractive parts of going to this area, okay? And one of the selling points, and people that are trying to get settlers to come to Oregon would actually use that, that sort of mentality. So this is the old route that Lewis and Clark took, and it's not very different than what these settlers during the period I'm referring to now will take. So they're going, Oregon Trail is right here. Willamette Valley I just described is right here along the Willamette River, right? This is the British-American boundary line that we want to pay attention to pretty soon. I mentioned 5440 or Fight. That would be up here by just above Fort Simpson. Okay, and the desire for some Americans to have all of this land instead of splitting it and co-occupying it with the British during this period of time. Oregon, you can see from this chart, is it's a big part of westward expansion and eventually what will become Manifest Destiny, reaching the Pacific Ocean. But it's certainly not the only place, right? In fact, the total, forget